All right.
You're starting. You're
I'm
up. You got the mic.
Sounds great. My name is Brad. I live in Arden Hills, and with my wife Amelia. I guess my vocation, what I do on my regular is I'm a nurse, and in my day to day, I serve as a nurse manager at a burn center.
Yes, you said burn center. I just thought that's important to point out. Okay. Yes. Who else lives with you guys, by the way?
So I'm Amelia, and we have a daughter, Aaliyah, who's 16, and a son, Tate, who is 13, and a dog named Lambo. And we live in Arden Hills, and I work as a social worker at Gillette Children's Hospital, which is weirdly inside of Regents Hospital where Brad works, so sometimes we have coffee.
I'm Drew, and we live in Rosemont. I'm going to let her talk about our cats. I am an alcohol and drug counselor here in Northeast at a methadone clinic, so people who are primarily addicted to opiates.
I'm Paisley. I'm married to Drew, and we have 2 disabled cats that we love very much. They both have different motor disabilities. And I'm a clinic assistant at Minji and kind of shifting my career over into nursing starting in January.
And I'm Farah. I live in South Minneapolis, and for work I do energy policy for a startup company, and I live by myself.
Do you remember this one time when the lights went out during a worship service, and you were able to tell me, because of your experience with energy, that it was a squirrel that shut out the lights and all the power in Northeast Minneapolis?
Yes, that did happen.
I felt like I had like an insider info. I was like, "What happened?" And she's like, "It was a squirrel. It's fried." Okay. All right. So here's the first question, and Farah, you can just hold the mic there. When you think about living the way of Jesus in your family, vocation, or neighborhood, how would you describe what that looks like for you?
Well, I spend most of my time at work, I think, on a day-to-day basis, so I think about that a lot. I think working in a startup is really interesting because you're sort of forming the chaos into order, which is something I really enjoy, but also is kind of a trait of God and Jesus. And so I think 2 things came to mind when I was thinking about this question. One is, I think, living in a way that you're generous with your resources, and not just money, but like your time, the skills that you have, being generous with what you can give other people and how you can help them is something that I feel close to God when I do that. And then the other thing is, I think, I work with a lot of people who are not Christians. And one of the things that we're doing right now is thinking about company values, because we're a new company, we're trying to establish those. And being able to infuse, not like sort of very specifically Jesus-focused things into the values, but like volunteering to kind of lead that and think about how can this secular workplace reflect God more is something that, I try to think about.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
I think I used to think following Jesus was like listening to God and getting an idea of a behavior I was supposed to do and just doing that over and over and over again throughout the course of a day. But now I just have found that that's exhausting and didn't produce a lot of great loving fruit in my life. I was just very anxious all the time with like, what behavior should I do and not do? And now it's more like shaping values and asking questions all the time and thinking about like, what do I actually value? Does that line up with what Jesus says I should value? And then watching behaviors come from a place of genuinely believing this is valuable. And that's been a lot more fruitful. And it's like a tab open in my brain all the time when I'm interacting with people of like, how do I deal with finances? Well, I've really thought about that. And Jesus says this, and I think that's the right way. And so I'm going to try this. And it's less of like thinking about individual behaviors as much as it's thinking about what is meaningful, what is bringing value to things, and that's been really freeing.
I like the idea of tabs. And how many tabs do you have open in your brain, though? Okay, because mine, it's usually as many as my computer, and it's too many in my computer. Okay, good. I love that. Go ahead, Drew.
So I have the privilege of growing up in a nice family. We all went to church, so I came into this world pretty much a Christian. My job as an alcohol and drug counselor is probably where I feel most like this intersection between normal life and our lives as Christians intersect, because Christ says in Matthew 25 that in loving the least of these, we love him. And when I'm sitting in my desk and I'm meeting with someone who's homeless or who had all of life together and got addicted to painkillers in the 2000s and ended up in my clinic, Christ is there in the room with me as I'm just having a conversation with someone who's trying to genuinely better their life. And I count that as a privilege to be able to be the person that sits in front of those people. I don't think I have much to give them. I think that they need someone who listens and who opens possibilities to them. And that usually is in a shoulder to cry on, someone to celebrate their small wins that we take advantage of every single day. So that's primarily how I see the intersection between my life as a counselor and who I want to become as a follower of Jesus.
Very similarly to Drew, as a social worker, I feel like it's kind of a no-brainer. I get a proximity to people's pain and get to sit with them and hear people's stories, walk with them. Gillette is a spot in which parents have chronically disabled or special needs children, and so getting to have the privilege of walking with people as they are caregiving and supporting them and figuring out different resources. And so that feels like a really easy example in terms of being able to take daily steps in following Jesus and hearing and seeking out ways in which I can be an example. In parenting, I would say much harder. And one of the things that came to mind in terms of living the way of Jesus, I'd say with my own kids, is about repair. And so it's about the daily times in which I was like, man, I could have done that so much better. Let's go back and try again. Ask for forgiveness of my kids, start over again, set a different tone the next time, and learn from one another, and keep going in that work. So.
I talk a lot with my staff about calling, and it's a privilege, I guess, in my role as a leader to talk about that with staff without having to, and being able to do that in a way that without even expressing where I'm coming from as somebody who's trying to follow Christ and what I do, and to work in the space that I do with people who are injured. It really allows me to live my calling, to help those in that way physically, and being able to step in and help them emotionally. And as they're working through a lot of life changes with like a burn injury. So I think for that's easy for me. Like it's easy in that it's very tangible to see where God is working, and I see miracles and things that are hard maybe for the medical community to say, how did that happen? And I love just to be able to be in those spaces. It's a privilege. And like what Amelia was saying about parenting, I think there's so much about how I live my life. It's not about being professing who I am, but more about living authentically. I think it's always been for me about how do I live my life in a way that's true and authentic. When we got the request to talk today, I was like, man, if my kids are here, what would they say? Like, why is my dad up there? But my birthday was recently, and I think one of the coolest affirmations I could have ever received from my kids, my daughter, who's a junior, said something about that you're so kind and you're so generous, and I thought, man, like that's who I try to be, and like that's such a win, I guess, in some ways, to say that she sees that, and that's the way that I would say I would try to live my life. And the fact that she could see that is like a big deal, because it's really just it's more than just talking and praying every day about who God is. It's really just living your life. So.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, the next question is, what does it look like at times for it to feel challenging to follow the way of Jesus in the spaces that you find yourselves in? You ready to start, or do you want to pass it over? You ready?
I'll give it a shot.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. What's challenging? I think truthfully right now, like it's seeing things in a way that is how God would see things. I can be in the trenches often, and I see people who I have to tell we can't care for them in our current space because of our current political situation. I can say that? Okay, I didn't know what I could say and I couldn't say.
I said I didn't know what you guys were going to say. You can say what you want.
Okay, I'll say it. And that's really challenging. It really is morally distressing for me. And it's hard because I also serve as an ethics consultant. And so working with patients and families as they're like making choices. And I see that is challenging. What I try to do and what is so challenging is I think of myself taking a 40,000 foot view and realizing like the things that are going on right now in our world are not new or surprising to God. And I think of all the pieces of, the Israelites thinking they wanted a king and they were given a king. And I think about that and where we're at now in this space. And I just know that God will prevail, and that through all of the things that are happening right now, that we have hope. And as Pastor Edgren said this morning, we have a living hope. And I think that's where it gives me the ability in those challenges.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, what would you say, Amelia?
I would say it's difficult in all spaces to be authentic. Grew up in a family in which kind of how we looked at church was very different than sometimes how we looked at home. And so there's a piece about that challenge that is so important about being authentic in all of the spaces I'm in. And that, funny story. So there's a girl named Rachel who goes to Mill City. And wonderful Rachel came up to me and said, "Hey, Amelia, I just want to tell you that Rachel at Mill City is the same Rachel as at work. But I know that you know both of us as Rachel, but I don't think you know that we're the same person." And I said, 100%, no, I don't know you as the same person.
It's like, oh.
And it was really wonderful in that example to be like, I hope that Rachel sees me at Mill City the same way that she sees me at work, that I am in these spaces as the same person who is trying to live out my daily call from Jesus.
It's a funny way to say we go to the same church.
I mean, it's embarrassing, really. But I was so glad she said it to me.
It's when you see somebody in a spot you're not expecting to see them.
Yes.
But yeah, so like that
Yeah.
consistency of like, would she recognize my way of being as the same in both spaces?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really
Absolutely. And I think that as you were saying, there's a space right now where we're also trying to figure out how we define ourselves. And everybody else is also defining us. And in those spaces to be authentic and be clear about who we are living for.
There's a couple ways I was thinking of answering this question. But I used to be in a position of like ministry. I was a missionary for several years. And I experienced a lot of church hurt and a lot of people that failed me. And so something that, as I was thinking about this, of what a challenge is for me, is I live with a lot of anger, resentment, kind of like in the Avengers, Hulk says, like, I'm always angry. It's, but learning how to follow Jesus with my anger is something that's always been very challenging, something that I've always tried to deny that I have. I like to be a calm person, someone who has everything in check, that people can't really read me on the outside. But expressing, being a part of, bringing my anger to church and to allowing other people to see it helps me heal. Helps me move forward, helps me believe that the church can be a force for good in this world when sometimes it feels like it's not. And I think I'm slowly making my way there. even speaking here today is like a step in that journey for me, because in the way that people have hurt me, I've also hurt other people. And for me to learn to trust what's coming out of myself and how it's interacting with the people around me is a step of change in the right direction. A way that I feel like Christ is pressing me to heal and to work through that anger that I've carried with me so many years.
Thanks for your courage, Drew.
Yeah, similar to that, I definitely, as a pastor kid, and then also going through similar experiences as him, I've lived long seasons in pessimism, and it's a really terrible place to be, and I feel like a lot of Gen Z also kind of has this nihilistic pessimism that people try to hide with humor, but like this dread for the future. And coming back to Jesus, I've had to shred that. Like, the whole thing is hope. And I've just really found that, like, Jesus has really met me in my pessimism. And when I just, like, release, like, the negative views I have towards people, I realize how that really boxes people in. And, like, to love people is to believe that the best outcome is possible. And, like, I think, like, Corinthians 13, love always hopes, or hopes all things, that has really allowed me to I've started to see the fruit of that in my life, where I had a lot of pessimism around community, and that I'm never going to find people that are going to get me in church anymore because we've dealt with hypocrisy in the past and been hypocrites. Like, I just don't believe that people can be good like that. And even very recently, I've been really astounded by how God has met me and showed me people and allowed me to believe in people again and believe that good community can exist. And that's been really transformative. And so I'm still trying to unravel my pessimism. And, like, if I carry this with me, I won't even see the goodness around me. And God's helping me shed that.
When I think about the times when I'm really struggling to reflect Jesus in my everyday life, I think it typically comes back to either self-reliance or self-righteousness for me. I pride myself on being a very capable person, and I can do a lot of things, but there are some things that I literally cannot do without Jesus' help. And so I tend to spend more time than I would like being frustrated about that, rather than sort of realizing where I am and going to him for the help that I need. So that's definitely something I'm working on. And then from this self-righteousness perspective, like, it was so interesting this morning when Pastor Edrin was talking about Peter chopping off somebody's ear when they were trying to arrest Jesus. I was like, okay, that feels pointed, because that's my reaction when I feel like people are disrespecting me. And working in a very, honestly, like a male-dominated work environment, utilities and energy policy in general is, not a lot of women work in that field all the time. And, I look younger than I am and all of these things. And so I encounter that quite a bit. And thinking, rather than stopping to think, how can I reflect Jesus in this moment? This person's opinion of me doesn't actually matter that much. I often don't have that reaction. So those are two things that I think, like, I would like to continue working on, thinking about how I can reflect Jesus better in my everyday work.
Awesome. You don't all have to answer this, but do a couple of you have an encouragement you want to give to the rest of these folks trying to figure out how to follow Jesus in their everyday lives? Farah, do you want to start? Do you have one?
I think the times when I encounter that self-reliance and I stop and I pray and ask for help, I think is like the best thing I can do in those moments, because he shows up. Yeah. Either he changes the situation or he changes me. And so, that's what I would say.
I think the seasons where I've felt furthest away from God, I've still found him. And, like, even in times where I believed I had no faith and that God wasn't with me, I still kept finding him. And it's not your effort that brings you closer to God. He's also leading you, and he can just do that. And it's not all on you to draw close to him.
We were never supposed to follow Jesus alone apart from community. We think in America that we can do things on our own, self-reliance, and just the act of being a part of a community is what Christ invites us into, and the fact that there's a bunch of messy people here tonight. We all have our stuff going on. The fact that we can be together. It's one of those few places in American life where a lot of different people from different backgrounds get together around one central thing that brings and binds communities together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, fear keeps us away and removed. And whenever we seek out the least of these and seek out community and conversation, we will find Jesus.
I see you got something.
I just would say being here tonight is like it's so encouraging to see everybody here. When I struggle, when I have those times in my life when I don't feel God near, when I feel like there's I don't see God at work. It's when I see others and I look out and I see where God is working, and it's being with people and the way that God meets me in those spaces. And this community has been a huge part of who I am in my life.
Amen. Can we thank the panel? Thanks, guys.